And welcome to another edition of the Bob Tuskin Show. So glad that you can join us once again, and we have quite the show planned for you tonight. Norway is currently making headlines for turning one of Nikola Tesla's most ambitious dreams into a modern reality. In a groundbreaking project in the city of Trondheim, the country has launched a pilot for wireless electric roads that charge vehicles while they are in motion. Over a century ago, Nikola Tesla envisioned a world wireless system to transmit electricity through the air and ground, aiming to power the globe without cables. While this Wardenclyffe Tower project ultimately failed due to financial and technical hurdles, the core principle, inductive charging, is exactly what Norway is now deploying on a citywide scale. Developed by the Israeli tech firm Electrion, the system uses copper coils embedded beneath the asphalt. These coils create an electromagnetic field that transfers energy to receivers installed on the undercarriages of vehicles. The current trials involve electric buses. The goal is to allow these buses to run 24/7 without ever needing to stop at a plug-in charging station. Tonight's guest is going to get into this and so much more, including an absolutely fascinating look at water. Tonight we're joined by Charlles Bohdy, a visionary entrepreneur and creator of the NPBOT, say that 5 times fast, Nanoplasmoid technology. Charlles is at the forefront of redefining how we use water and energy to optimize human health. Tonight, Charlles is going to break down the latest breakthrough in Tesla tech that I just mentioned, specifically focusing on what happened in Norway, but going above and beyond with his unique understanding of not just Tesla tech, but the energy system as a whole. Charlles has developed a next-generation platform that goes beyond the traditional systems. His nanoplasma spa technology is something we're going to tell you about. His work merges science, beauty, and vitality with worldwide installations ranging from Devon, England to Irvine, California. And we're going to talk about some of the major breakthroughs he's had using this nanoplasma water and what is the nanoplasma water. And without further ado, I'm welcome my buddy Charlles Bohdy to the broadcast on the Bob Tuskin Show. What's up, Charlles? How are you?
Hey, I'm flourishing. How you doing today, Ryan?
I could complain. If my name was Ryan, I would tell you that, but it's Bob Tuskin, and I'm glad to have you on. Maybe that was the last podcast you were on. Anywho, so Charlles, what do you make of this story in Norway? I know you've been a lifelong student of Tesla tech. Tell me what you think of it.
Well, I'm not sure what they're really planning on doing. I've had the opportunity to go through the Wardenclyffe bankruptcy notes, and Nikola Tesla was interviewed, deposed actually during the bankruptcy hearing. And, from that, most people believe that he was planning on sending power wirelessly through the air. Couldn't be further from the truth. Upon examining his deposition, it was discovered there was over 100-foot tall or deep into the earth iron core rod that was 8 inches in diameter. So he was actually going to be sending power through the soil. In fact, Tesla thought that Hertz was a fool for trying to send stuff through the air. He believed that the air was a poor conductor, and ideally the best way to do it is to send it straight in through the soil. Even when he demonstrated the world's first remote control, he drove a boat up the Hudson River, and his antenna went directly into the water, and the boat had an antenna that went into the water because the water was a much better conductor, of course, than the air.
That's fascinating. So the world is on a bunch of ley lines, and I think Tesla understood that, if I'm not mistaken, Charlles.
No, I have no opinion about that. Could be.
Yeah, I think it's all connected, and it's interesting that what we know of Tesla has been shifted and changed. When did you start researching Tesla? Tell me a little bit about your deep dive into Tesla, and you've had some experience in the world of energy as well, if I'm not mistaken.
Well, I became a member of Tesla Tech Society, I think maybe 20 years ago, and I've read most of the printed literature related to him, many books about Mr. Tesla. Albert Einstein was asked, how does it feel to be the smartest man in the world? And he said, I don't know. Why don't you ask Mr. Tesla?
That's right. He did say that.
Yes, sir.
And it's interesting. Elon Musk named the car company Tesla, of course, which is a nod to Nikola Tesla. And I think these days most people don't know the difference. They hear Tesla, they assume it's the car company. They don't teach it in the schools, do they?
No, they don't. And, literally everything that we use in our modern world that surrounds us was pretty much the brainchild of Nikola Tesla. He invented he was a proponent of alternating current over direct current, and that is the electricity that runs through our walls. He invented the fluorescent light, which still lights up most of the commercial buildings around the world, even though they're gradually being shifted over to the LEDs. For the last 100 years, fluorescent lights were the go-to low power consuming lighting systems that lit the world. And he built the first hydroelectric power plant, or designed it, for Niagara Falls, and that's still operating today. And he patented the first induction motor for alternating current. And as a matter of fact, I visited the Smithsonian Institution 20 some years ago, and there was the world's first patented electric motor. And it had Tesla's patent number written right on it. And then right next to it is a bust of Thomas Alva Edison, with no credit being given to Nikola Tesla. And even in the book of the greatest 100 minds of the 20th century that was published by the Smithsonian Institution, curiously, they left Nikola Tesla out. Yet, everything we do today, the wireless transmission of information, that was all Tesla. When you lay your phone down on a inductive charging pad where there's no cord attached to it, that inductive charging mechanism is pure Tesla. So, virtually everything that we have in the world of technology today has some roots in Tesla. He developed commercial X-ray machines for physiology. He developed ozone equipment for treating water and treating the human physiology. The man was a veritable fountain of ideas and technologies.
He truly was. And you mentioned Edison. Tesla had quite the, I don't know if you could call it a rivalry, but quite the relationship with Thomas Edison, didn't he?
Well, Nikola Tesla was a fan of Thomas Edison. He came over from Croatia, and he worked for Edison for some time. The issue was really more of an ego issue with Edison, where Edison felt threatened by Tesla's true brilliance. And eventually that ended up in a parting of ways. And over the course of many years, Edison went around the country electrocuting, elephants and pets and farm animals to prove that his direct current system was far safer than Tesla's alternating current. But, the rivalry was undeserved. Tesla was a fan of Mr. Edison, and I think would have worked there happily for the rest of his life if he'd been given credit and compensation.
Absolutely. It's funny. Somebody showed this to me, and I take it with a grain of salt. Some people don't believe they look alike. But if you take a picture of young Thomas Edison and you hold it side by side to Elon Musk, the two look quite similar. Just saying. Have you ever seen that, Charles?
Sure have not. No.
It's
Mr. Edison,
it's interesting.
He was born minutes away from my childhood home. I visited his childhood home, and he was a true workaholic. He was a brilliant guy in his own right, but what Edison was really good at was understanding markets and need, and he was really good at taking technologies and converting them into viable market-based products. And Tesla was always thinking about the new next best thing, and he wasn't really concerned with the commercialization aspects, and that that really served to his detriment over the course of his life. He was dependent on the wealth of others to keep
Right.
him working on new technologies.
Yeah, and that's one of the big threats. The powers that shouldn't be, they can buy innovative technology and then sit on it. I think there's probably a ton of examples out there of this sort of strategy. And a lot of people associate the name Nikola Tesla with free energy or an over unity energy supply, sort of the holy grail of taking things to the next level. Have you given it any thought? Do you think over unity is out there? It violates the laws of thermodynamics, but yet a lot of people believe that there may be technology that exists on the planet today along those lines. What is your thought on that?
Well, I think we've been misled about a variety of topics, and I'm not going to speak to over unity or free energy technologies at length because that's not my area of research. But I can tell you that they do the definition of work involves moving something across an inclined plane. They'll tell you there is no such thing as over unity, yet they will tell you that an electron continues to spin around the center of the atom, the proton or the neutron, indefinitely with no additional power source. So that seems to defy one of Newton's laws. They had to create a fictitious strong nuclear force to make the math work when they observed that.
Right.
You can have something like a refrigerator magnet stuck on your refrigerator for 20 years holding physical weight. No energy input has been granted, yet it's still sitting there doing work, holding weight opposed to the quote unquote force of gravity. So I think there are a lot of things that we've been told that don't exist. For example, the patent office won't allow you to patent a perpetual motion machine. Yet scientists at MIT built a series of nitinol devices that deal with the memory function of nickel titanium alloy, nitinol. And they've been continuously running for over a decade with no energy input. So I think it's more about how you structure devices rather than violating, Newton's quote unquote laws. It's really about realizing that we live in an open source universe full of abundance, as opposed to relying in the, powers that shouldn't be scarcity mindset mentality that they've allowed to permeate our science and our institutions. And not only that, if you try to patent something that may challenge those norms, we have the National
Right.
Security Patent Act that allows them to come in, put the patent under national security wraps, and even impress the inventor into service, unpaid service for the government. So I think there are some things that we really need to step back and take a look at and reassess how to do things in a more productive, free, and open way that would be something that was in accordance with the will of our forefathers as opposed to the way that it
Mhm.
works today.
Yeah, I love all those things that you mentioned. Abundance is such a important part of my work. And of course, in my talk at the Free Your Mind conference that I gave titled Scarcity-Based Mind Control and the Liberation of the Mind, Body, and Spirit, we talk a bit about what we ought to see in our world today as far as having an abundance of technology to be for the betterment of man and not have it suppressed and not have it used in evil ways. You touch on a lot of what I talk about in the latter part of that lecture. And one of the major themes to your research and your work is health. And if we have an abundance of good health, then we're already a step above and beyond what the powers that shouldn't be, as I like to call them, want us to be, which is sick, brainwashed, not intelligent, not learning. And we're going to get into that because you're an inventor and you've invented an incredible device and technology that has transformed water in a way that's doing an amazing amount of good for people. And I want to do a deep dive into that because water fascinates me. I want to learn more about what is water, what is structured water. I want to talk about all of these things and more. But before we get into that, I want to talk a little bit about the idea that information now is so abundant on the internet, but it's a double-edged sword, because although it's abundant, although people have access to more information than ever before, there's so much fluff out there that it's like finding a needle in a haystack. And I know you're fond of waking people up and educating them and employing a true education. Tell me a little bit about how important education is to you and your family, and how you see the powers that shouldn't be occulting certain things from the masses, and how we can get beyond that. You froze up. You still there? Uh-oh. I think we may have lost
No,
Charles.
I'm right here. I'm
Oh,
right
you're
here.
back.
I don't know.
Okay.
Apologize. I'm limited to Elon Musk-based internet here.
The irony. So anyways, I just wanted to touch on education and learning, and I see a vast library, and I know how important it is to you and your family. So I wanted to give you a moment just to talk about a real education and what sort of information you'd like to see proliferated in our world today.
Well, when it comes to education, I think the most important thing is following a different model, an older model they call the classical education method. It was developed by the Greeks originally, and it focused on grammar, rhetoric, and logic, and in that order, where you lay the groundwork in grammar and then teach the basics of logic, and eventually culminate in learning the art of rhetoric. And principally, the most important thing we can teach our children is how to understand the logical fallacies. They all need to be memorized and learned, because when we understand how to ask good questions, and we know what the logical fallacies are, we can realize when we're tempted to be when people are attempting to manipulate us and to get us to believe fictions. And by simply understanding what the logical fallacies are, how they're employed, it eliminates the ability of people to become sheeple and to be easily manipulated by 30-second sound bites and taken out of context headlines proliferated by the yellow journalism that's so common today.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And we talked about the trivium on last week's broadcast as well. It's a reoccurring theme, because I see it as a prerequisite to deciphering what truth is out there or not out there, for that matter. And you can apply it to so many things. You can apply it to current events, or if you're like me and you're tired of getting hung up on this flavor or that flavor of whatever the newest current event is, you can apply it towards more deep research on things like health or solution-oriented things that you and I are both passionate about, Charles. And one of the things that you're most passionate about, without further ado, is health. You've done a lot of research into alternative cures, if you will. Am I allowed to use the C word, Charles? Is that taboo?
I would never. I don't believe in curing anything.
Okay.
No.
Why not? Why don't we use the C word? Is it just to appease the bureaucrats, or?
No, I mean, Benjamin Franklin said it best when he said, "The body heals itself, the physician collects the fee." So we are a body comprised of soul, spirit, and physical matter, and we're really a grouping of cells, and not all of our cells are even native to us. We have bacteria colonies and fungal colonies and other things that comprise the corpus that we call our human body, and it is a self-organizing corpus. So the intelligence is in the cells in the body, written into the DNA, and then written into the software that they call junk DNA, or the operating system that runs the cells. So, to use the term cure implies that an outside force is performing some magical voodoo to effect a change or a cure. And that brings you to the root word of what we call modern medicine today, which is pharmacology. And that the root word is Greek. It's called pharmakia, and it really means sorcery, or in some interpretations, black magic. So rather than relying on sorcery, it's better to create the conditions and provide the body with the building blocks so that it can self-organize in a way that it makes it thrive and be healthy. And then you have to worry about curing things.
Absolutely. And you mentioned the body's made up of a ton of different things, but it's predominantly water, is it not?
Well, by molecular weight, yeah, up to 90 some percent. They say the body's 70% water, and that may be true, but by molecular weight, it's a lot more than that.
What are the implications of that?
Well, water is an anomalous thing. It's according to Professor Bill Tiller of Stanford, who was the former dean of material sciences there, it's a cage-like molecule capable of storing frequencies and information. And so water is a living liquid crystal, and it is, powerfully affected by information. It has a memory, and it even has a life cycle. Greats like Victor Schauberger said that it goes through a life cycle process. So when it's born through the process of evaporation condensation, it comes out as immature water, which would be its birth, or distilled water would be a form of immature water. But it's hungry for memory. It's hungry for information. It's looking to be filled. And so as water travels through the air, and then it travels through soil and through feeder streams, and it vortexes around rocks and capillaries and runs through the earth, it picks up minerals, it picks up memory, and it picks up information along the way. And eventually, when it gets to its final mature stage, we get things like levitating springs that spring up from the earth. And that water is, what we would consider ideal water, like literal mountain spring water that continues to rise from the earth without pumping.
Right. Yeah, that spring water is abundant in my neck of the woods, and it's one of the reasons why I've stayed in this area. It's absolutely amazing how well I feel after grounding in the springs. We're lucky to have beautiful springs here, and I go take a swim, and they're 72 degrees year round. Please don't move to Florida, folks. You wouldn't like it. It's horrible, but they're crystal clear and they're beautiful. And afterwards, I do feel a sense of well-being. Is there a grounding effect in swimming in either the springs or the ocean or something along those lines?
Well, those springs are also loaded with minerals, and they've got all sorts of benefits to the body. And your skin, of course, is the endothelial glycocalyx, a subcomponent of it, is the body's largest organ. So you can take in more minerals through your skin more rapidly than you can through your gut. So soaking,
transdermally.
That's right, transdermally.
And that's why your showers are really important. You don't want your showers to, or your baths, and we'll talk about your tubs, but you don't want to soak up all the chlorine and fluoride and all of these dangerous things in our water supply.
Like, Bill Gates says the next generation of vaccines are going to be delivered transdermally through the skin. And that's because they realize the power of the skin to accept information, or accept medicines, or in some cases we might consider them pharmaceuticals, depending on your viewpoint. But the body is really susceptible when you're in a shower state, especially. And if you're living in a municipality where they're putting massive amounts of chlorine in water that people don't realize just how disgusting our modern water treatment plants are, but they have these things called grabbers, and their job is to grab chunks of toilet paper and wet wipes and disgusting things that got flushed down the toilet that won't dissolve naturally. So they have this little monster looking machine called the grabber that pulls this stuff up and bails it. And then they just start injecting it in a series of settlement ponds, and they dope it with chlorine at really, really high concentrations. As a matter of fact, the water that makes it back into our taps after running through the whole modern quote unquote processing system, has 4 times the level of chlorine on average that's considered safe to swim. So when you're taking a shower with tap water, you're getting more chlorine in the air. It's actually less safe to shower than it is to smoke cigarettes. So you get far more lung damage from showering than you'd get from actually, doing what my British friends say, lighting up a fag after dinner. It's way more toxic to shower in chlorinated water than it is to even smoke tobacco products.
Yeah. They say sitting is the new smoking. Perhaps they should be saying showering is the new smoking.
It's worse.
Wow.
Yeah, definitely worse.
That's wild. And you were talking about the water treatment facilities, and I just watched a piece from 60 Minutes. Don't get me wrong, that's not my favorite source of information, but they were talking about how China had access to the computer systems to over 200 small towns throughout the United States, water treatment facilities.
That's
it's interesting. Yeah.
Definitely
Those that control the water control, perhaps.
Well, and the thing is, because water is a cage-like molecule capable of storing frequencies and information, we end up, urinating and flushing down the toilets and in our sinks, medicines, SSRIs, allergy medication, Viagra, all sorts of these pharmaceutical companies' products. And what people don't realize is that they synthesize those chemicals from oil. So the quote unquote pharmaceutical drugs are made from petrochemical distillates. So you've got this, toxic chemical distillate that is in the water that's coming from these drugs. And then you have the actual effects, that many of which still remain, and it's retained by the water as memory. So even if you even if you kill the bacteria with chlorine and you filter out the biggest, amounts of the chemicals, you still are leaving the memory of those toxins, bacteria, and pathogens in the water itself, even the memory of the petrochemicals. So there was a physicist in Germany that did an experiment 10 years or so ago where they took contaminated water samples, they filtered it out to ultra pure pharmaceutical grade. That means injectable. Right. And he was able to take that water, run it through his machine, and correctly identify all the pathogens that had been removed and all the contaminants simply from the memory that was left behind, or the energy signatures left behind in the water. And was not given a list of the contaminants ahead of time, but yet his machine correctly identified this. So
that's insane. Now, I will say that it's still better to do something with your water, though. I mean, for those out there who don't have access to the sorts of technology that you've helped innovate, please do something. I mean, use a Berkey with a fluoride filter. Use something, correct?
Well, sure. It's better to filter water than not filter water.
Sure. So what are the best options for those that want to figure out how to deal with their water supply?
Best options would be to purchase an Energized Living Water system. But what I think the thing that's missed, most often is the information component. So, water isn't this simple molecule H2O that we've been taught. And using porosity filtration, which is basically a strainer to strain out the impurities, leaves behind the memory. And so any good system really needs to deal with the memory. There are a lot of people, the go-to standard in homes has become reverse osmosis. Well, reverse osmosis water is dead. First of all, it really isn't a filtration technology.
Right.
It's a concentration technology. So it takes half of the water and it concentrates the toxins from one half into the other half, and that goes down the drain in a house. If you're in the ocean and you're using an RO system, it goes back into the ocean as brine, and it's been proven to have terrible environmental impacts because it's that water that's injected back into the ocean has doubled the salinity of the water that was purified for drinking. So, but reverse osmosis strips the minerals out of water. And our bodies need a minimum of 72 trace elements to get full genetic expression. And our soils have been stripped for over 100 years. We're only putting 3 minerals back on the soil. And so it becomes vital to make sure we're getting the minerals and the things that we need. Well, when you're taking RO water, you're stripping all the minerals out. It becomes dead. As a matter of fact, they did some early installations in large commercial greenhouses of RO systems, and they found that the plants were more sickly even after being fed this RO water, and they had a tremendous problem with mold, which you don't get out of standard traditional filtration over the RO filtration. But the minerals become really vital, and you need the minerals to affect life-giving properties into water. So the system that I developed, really relies on a different type of filter technology. And I'm not the inventor of the filter. A good friend of mine developed it for medical practices, typically in-house plastic surgeons and oral surgeons that need irrigation water for when they're doing surgery. And they developed a multi-layer pleated filter system that uses electrical charge rather than porosity filtration to selectively remove pathogens. We can take out viruses to 7 nines, that's 99.9999999%. Bacteria to 10 nines, so 99.10, 10 nines afterwards.
99999.
Yes. And each 9 is a logarithmic scale, so it's 10 times more than the 9 before that. So when you get to 10 nines purification, that's about as pure as we're capable of getting. And so, but we're leaving, we're taking out the forever chemicals like X and PFAS and fluoride.
Sure.
We're taking out bad minerals like, radium and cadmium and uranium. But we're leaving, we're leaving calcium, we're leaving magnesium, we're leaving trace cobalt and copper, the minerals that our body needs to thrive and survive. And rather than using salt, we use a magnetic field to begin to soften the water and drop the calcium to aragonite. And then we begin vortexing that water past catalyst discs. So the vortexing past the catalyst disc does 2 things. The vortexing begins to erase the memory component of the water. It's sort of like rewriting the hard drive to a blank disk. It's like formatting the disk. The catalysts that we're running it past drop up to 85% of the calcium to aragonite, which is the crystallized version of calcium. Still able to be used by your body, but it doesn't clog the sides of your pipes, and it won't clog the elements in your water heater and your water tanks. So it makes it a softer water without having to use ion exchange or salt systems that make the water.
And there's a lot of hard water, right? And a lot of hard water requires those sorts of systems, but this addresses that. I want to do a deeper dive
but then the next thing and the last thing, the most important part of the system is the thing that's left out by virtually all water filter companies. And that is to put the memory of life back in the water.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. Are you programming the water with certain emotions? We talk about Dr. Emoto and what he saw when he looked at water in a certain way. Are you able to put certain frequencies and certain love and care and all these cool things back and reprogram the water?
Speaking of Emoto,
Okay.
And then there's another German scientist named Bernd Kropf, and Emoto used to take water and expose it to frequencies and information. He exposed it to words, he exposed it to microwaves, he exposed it to different types of music, even different types of prayer. And then he would freeze the water and he would photograph the water crystals as they formed in the freezer. But he was given a lot of criticism by certain of his peers that claimed that he cherry-picked the photographs of the crystals that he wanted to represent his beliefs. Now, I don't think that that's true. I've met several people that work directly with Emoto for years and years who say that's absolutely a fantasy. But the German scientist, Mr. Kropf, he was a physicist, and he is a physicist, and he wrote a book called The World in a Drop. So he applied rigorous scientific method to studying, instead of water crystals, dried water droplets. Wow. And he was able to prove beyond a shadow of a doubt all of the things that Emoto had seen. He was able to see in dried water droplets using his methodology. And I have that book behind me on the shelf right here, along with a couple of Emoto's books. But Bernd Kropf did an amazing job of, eliminating the skeptics by applying rigid scientific method testing. And we could talk about how the scientific method is flawed in and of itself, because it fails to take into account the intention of the observer, and that's something that quantum physics has been delving
quantum physics.
Into.
Yeah, it's an absolutely fascinating conversation. We're going to do a deeper dive into consciousness and the observer and this reality with this new reincarnation of the Bob Tuskin show. So all great topics, but back to your technology and your innovation. So just to recap.
Imprinting the energy of life back into the water is what we were talking about. And so
tell me.
We have developed a technique that uses piezoelectric. So as the water is running through our structuring device, it is creating passive electricity through the piezoelectric effect. And it's creating, millions of negative ions as the water travels through, and that provides the power source for us to then imprint the memory of life and minerals back into the water. So we call it a Biofield imprinting device, and it's proprietary technology, but it literally imprints the energy of life and living systems back into the water. We've got studies that were done as far away as India, and recent studies that are done on our device by scientists in Czechoslovakia. They've done some work with live blood. They've done work with plants. And, plants are not subject to the placebo effect, at least as far as we know. Yet we've seen 20% to 250% yield increases in everything from row crops to fruits and vegetables. So if the plant's growing 20% more yield, that it's doing something.
Yeah, I mean, that could be a major threat. The powers that shouldn't be don't want to see more food grown in more efficient ways, unfortunately. We know that during the Great Depression, for the first time ever in human history, mechanical energy surpassed human labor, allowing us to produce with the resources, particularly in North America, more food than ever before. But rather than proliferate that abundance, they paid farmers to destroy crops, with dairy farmers pouring milk down the drain and farmers deliberately not growing plants. And still to this day, farmers are paid billions of dollars to not grow, and subsidies from the government. So we know it's not a matter of the potential for abundance. It's a matter of the powers that shouldn't be limiting that abundance.
Well, if you're talking about farms, let's talk about the even bigger scandal, which is the fact that every farmer goes into debt every spring to buy the seed that they're going to put on the soil to grow the crops.
The Monsanto seeds?
I'm not picking on any particular, death-oriented cult companies, but
right, you don't want to do that.
The Bible has a very simple method. It says to keep back 10% of your seed to plant next year's crops. And so the Creator that I believe created our universe built in more seeds than we can possibly consume, so that every year, by saving 10%, we have enough to plant next year's crops. But farmers don't do this anymore. They go to the bank every spring to take out seed loans, and they start the year under the gun of the heavy gun of debt, a gun held straight to their temples. And if they have a bad year where something fails, they can go under because of this massive debt, where simple seed saving would eliminate all of that. They
Sure.
got farmers into this in the Great Depression during the 1930s, and it's become so standard that modern farmers have forgotten how to seed save.
The
And then
debtor is slave to the lender, and in this case, the debtor is a slave to genetically modified seeds, for instance, where they can't even seed save if they wanted to. They can choose the seeds that come from the plants that had the strongest yield, and they can't go and produce that particular seed, because one of the things that happens when you seed save is that the next generation of plants grow even better because of perhaps epigenetic memory that seed carries, and is more adapt to the growing location and the growing conditions of that area. So it's fascinating that the powers that shouldn't be have tried to get us away from this sort of abundance and common sense.
Yeah, as I said at the outset, I believe we live in an abundant universe, and scarcity is artificial. So, I'm not picking on the farmers. I'm actually lamenting the fact that they're so indoctrinated that they've come to believe that the only way to farm is to take out the loan. And it came during the bankruptcy in 1933, and they've gotten them, addicted to the teat of the lender. And the Bible says that the borrower is servant to the lender. It says the lender is the head and the borrower is the tail. And I think that the key to freedom in many levels is to throw off the shackles of debt slavery, which is the new invisible slavery. Not race-based, but financially constrictions that are created through being servants to lenders.
Well, what a wonderful digression, but let's get back to your water technology, because I want people to understand some of the results people have had in bathing in it, because you mentioned how important transdermally water is to the human body. And I want to talk a little bit from a layman's, if you could break it down for the layman, what is nanoplasmoid technology? Say that 5 times fast, folks. What is nanoplasmoid technology? How did you come across this, and what uses have you found for this amazing technology?
Well, that is a segue from the water filter. That's a different technology. And rather than calling myself an inventor, I'm more of a product developer and a steward to the great ideas that the Creator gives me. In the book of Proverbs, it says that God will give you creative ideas and witty inventions. But what a nanoplasmoid is something I stumbled across in working on developing an improvement to electrolytic oxygenation of water. And we were working with a technology that used electricity to split water into its component parts, and in so doing create trillions of negative ions. And I realized that these gases that were being liberated from the water were mostly escaping atmospherically. But we'd seen great effects. I was working on a project originally for poultry using the water, and we found we could virtually eliminate the pathogen-based effects of poultry in modern concentrated animal feeding operations. So these 100 million bird barns where they lose 15% of every flock in, flock out, to dead birds because it's unnatural to grow 1 million birds in a barn. We were able to virtually eliminate that by giving them this electrolytically oxidized water.
Real quick, Charles, the irony I have to interject. We'll be talking about flock cameras during the next hour with our guest Jeff Gray, who will be talking about a different kind of flock. I own chickens and I love my chickens, but ironically, we'll be talking about them spying on us with the flock cameras in the next hour with First Amendment constitutional activist Jeffrey Gray. So stay tuned for that, folks, because they're watching us. Big Brother is always watching us. Anyways, I digress, but I just had to comment on that. But go ahead. Nanoplasmoid. How do you say it? Nanoplasmoid? Is that
Call it
right?
nanoplasma water, or the
Okay.
things that are being generated in the water we call plasmoids. That's a physics principle. Charged gases and charged electricity can manifest as something called the fourth phase of matter is called plasma, and it can manifest as a spherical or toroidal form, and it self-organizes into those forms. So as I was looking at how to increase the efficacy of capturing the gases that were being generated through the process of electrolysis and generating these, negative ions, I started looking to different types of technology to strip the gases and reintroduce them into the water. And in 2014 or 15, I went to a seminar where I saw a Japanese man give a lecture on nanobubbles. And I'd never heard of a nanobubble, but traditional bubble formation is called coalescence. So smaller bubbles are attracted to other smaller bubbles, and they form larger and larger bubbles till they get big enough to rise to the surface of the water and break. And when you get bubbles in water under 100 nanometers, something magical happens. In physics, it's called a zeta potential shift. But essentially, the bubble develops a net negative electrical charge, and the van der Waals forces on the inside and the outside of the bubble increase, and the bubble becomes super strong. But there's another effect. When all bubbles have the same negative charge, they can no longer come together in the process of coalescence, which normal bubbles follow. They actually are repelled from one another like same pole magnets. And so in that repelling force, it allows the bubbles to stay in solution. I've kept bubbles in solution for up to 6 years in a bottle, from one application. And when we generate our nanobubbles, we're using a series of technologies. We're manipulating the electrical fields themselves. That's my most recent patent, is manipulating electrical fields when generating nanobubbles or nanoplasmoids. And it allows for these bubbles to be metastable, where many nanobubbles will only last in water for months. We can do it for years and years.
So you could potentially bottle this water and sell it on the shelves to people to drink?
Absolutely, and it has some profound effects, although I can't make any claims. There are 1,800 or more peer-reviewed studies showing the crazy beneficial effects of different gases on human physiology. So the effect of the plasma inside the bubble forming a toroid, which is what it does. A toroid, for layman, is just a donut shape. But what happens when these bubbles are formed and they become metastable, it has all sorts of physiological effects. And just in the last 5 years, Cambridge University in England published a study called the nanoarchitecture of the cell. And what they discovered is that our bodies are nanobubble generators. So when we inspire,
go ahead. Yeah, that's fascinating.
When we breathe in at the alveoli interface in our lung, when we were kids, they taught us, you breathe in oxygen, you breathe out carbon dioxide.
Sure.
And I thought this was well-settled science. So, I'm reading this Cambridge paper, and the very first thing they said is the least understood aspect of human physiology is what happens at that alveoli, how the oxygen goes in and the carbon dioxide comes out. And they discovered that in the nanoarchitecture of the cell, we're generating O2 and N2 nanobubbles, so oxygen and nitrogen nanobubbles. And then at expiration, when we breathe out, we're generating CO2 nanobubbles that are generated through interstitial foams. and they line the lowest level of our skin, the endothelial glycocalyx, the body's largest organ we referred to just a little bit ago. So our body uses and depends on nanobubbles for all sorts of transport mechanisms, for redox signaling, for communication. And what we discovered is that when you either imbibe them or drink them, or even better, when you're surrounded by them, soaking in a fluid-filled tub or a bathtub, your body now has access to trillions of times more nanobubbles or nanoplasma than it would generate on its own naturally. And it has no way of knowing that these bubbles are exogenously generated. As far as it knows, it generated them, and it just puts them to work. And as I mentioned, I don't believe in curing anything. My technology does nothing to cure. But what it does is it provides conditions that allows that self-organizing effect of the body to begin structural repair.
So it taps into the body's natural mechanism to heal itself, to deal with these sorts of toxins.
Correct.
Interesting. And when people soak in this or drink this water, break down for me what happens and give me some of the results of this
one thing that happens,
exposure.
When you're old or when you're in a disease state, your blood platelets tend to clump together.
They clump together, right?
And when you've got more than 2 platelets clumped together, they won't go through the body's finest capillary. You see, the size of the platelet and the size of the capillary are virtually the same size. I mean, it's so closely in diameter, it's a wonder that the platelet can even move through. So when you have 2 together, they will no longer go through the capillary. Well, that's what happens in diabetic people with diabetic ulcers. Their blood becomes thick and clumping, and now you can't get the oxygen carried by the platelet into the deepest, most hypoxic tissue. And it's what they call death by inches, where they start by chopping off the big toe and then the other toes and then half of the foot and then the whole foot to the ankle and up to the knee until eventually they end up in the grave.
So the nanoplasmoids help to penetrate in a way that
when you take oxygen in its charged state, what happens when it goes into the platelet is the platelet retains the charge. And so now all of a sudden, these blood platelets that are clumped together, we can watch in real time separate because the negative charge prevents them from clumping. And so, I call my technology NPBOT, which is nanoplasma balneo-oxygen therapy. It's a play on the HBOT or hyperbaric oxygen therapy. But what it's really allowing the body to do is to get oxygen to the deepest, most hypoxic tissue. One of those mechanisms is charge. Another one is actually the hydrogen. So people don't realize the powerful effect that hydrogen has in the body. As the lightest element and in the most powerful antioxidant, it's also incredibly capable of tissue inflammation reduction. So when your body is in an inflamed state, and in all disease states, virtually, there's some level of inflammation. The inflammation can seal off the intracellular oxygen pathways. So when you're soaking in molecular hydrogen or breathing molecular hydrogen, many of the studies show, you're able to cause this massive anti-inflammatory effect. We see people that are soaking in our tubs, they get out and they report conditions where their pain seems to have disappeared and it stays gone for a long time from a simple soak, which sounds implausible, but it happens. And what that does is it opens up those intracellular oxygen pathways and it allows us to get oxygen delivery to the deepest, most hypoxic tissue, far more than you can get out of a simple hyperbaric chamber, which relies on just oxygen and pressure. And it's actually the secondary gas, hydrogen gas, even for the mitochondrial function. For oxygen to go into the mitochondria, there has to be a certain amount of molecular hydrogen on the cell membrane or the oxygen can't be used.
And for those that are forgetting, the mitochondria is the powerhouse of the cell. It's It's at the essence of the
It's
foundation of
where all
health.
of our energy is made at the cellular
Right.
level. It's the ATP cycle. Cancer cells are cells where that mitochondrial ATP function has been hijacked into one of fermentation.
Exactly.
Um, so, when we're dealing with correcting the ATP cycle, it can have many downstream cascade of effects. And again, this is all due to the body's self-organizing. It has nothing to do with my fluid. It has everything to do with the body being put into a state where it can heal itself. Like Ben Franklin said, the
It's a
physician
beautiful thing.
collects the fee, the body heals itself.
That's an amazing take on this, and I think that's one that the pharmaceutical complex would not like to hear, but nonetheless, it's true.
And this water
It's
also becomes structured. So it's, the water inside
yeah.
the
What does
cells,
that mean? What does structured water mean? Well, I hear that term a lot. I think often people
it,
listening
it's
do as well. What does that mean?
it's a terrible misnomer that can mean a bunch of different things depending on the people that are using the term. But in practical terms, what I'll say is that Dr. Gilbert Ling did a bunch of research on intracellular water. And he discovered that the water inside the cells is substantially different from typical water. That work was then carried on by Professor Gerald Pollack, who proved that water that passes through a series of tubules or microtubules develops a different structure. It becomes denser, and he called it easy water, or the fourth phase of water. But it is water that more closely resembles the water inside the cells than the water outside the cells. And so, that's another benefit of soaking in a bathtub full of this structured type water,
Right.
is you're able to drag the gases into places where the capillaries won't go. So joint capsules and cartilage and other tissues that aren't supplied by the blood itself end up being able to have this payload of gases delivered through the mechanism of hydration. So for certain conditions, getting the gases there is very difficult because there's no capillary blood flow. But you can't hide from the mechanism of hydration. We find
And you've
people that get in the tub, they may, in the first time they get in, they'll become pruny in 5 minutes, like they were soaking in a regular bathtub for an hour. It's because they're so chronically dehydrated that when they start taking in this water that's similar to cellular water, they get overwhelmed. By the second or third time, it may take 20 minutes. By their fifth soak, they could be in the tub for an hour and they don't get pruny anymore. And the reason is they finally become truly hydrated. In some cases, maybe the first time since they left the womb, the amniotic fluid.
That's incredible. And you've actually looked at people's blood under a microscope. What do they call that when you look at blood in
A
live
dark
time?
field microscopy, yeah.
Yeah, and you've seen almost instantaneous differences in the way the blood structure looks, if I'm not
Yeah,
mistaken.
within minutes, yes.
It's fascinating stuff. Now, these tubs, utilizing your nanoplasmoid technology, this isn't something that people can get yet, is it? This isn't available to the general
Oh
public, is
yeah, it
it?
is. We have more tubs in wealthy
Really?
people's homes than we have in clinics. Although we have quite a few people that are putting them in biohacking clinics, medical facilities, and other
Really?
gyms and things like that. Matter of fact, we're
So,
just coming out with a new underwater treadmill that has the nanoplasma
well,
water
that's cool.
system, so you can work out in these gases.
That's cool.
We
So,
had a
but this is not just for the elite, though. What's your vision? You want to see this where people can go to their neighborhood holistic practitioner or whomever and soak in the tubs and have access to this water? Is that your vision?
Well, sure. I'd like it to be on every shelf for people to be able to drink.
Yeah, that'd be great. and maybe an at-home unit that people can start to install. Those reverse osmosis systems aren't cheap, and they don't do much, as we discussed earlier. All right, so this spa technology is out there. It's in a number of places already. And people can get access to this. So if they have a holistic health practice, or they want to recommend it to their local biohacking community, this is something that people can get right now as we speak.
Yeah, nanohydrotherapy.com is a website. The
Okay.
water filters are at energizedlivingwater.com. And
All
if
right.
you want to
Or
put
they
in,
can just reach out to me. I'll put them in touch with you.
you can put in Bob Tuskin, and we'll give you some kind of a good discount on anything.
No, don't give them a discount. Don't give them a discount. We gotta.
Come on. I like you too much to not do that.
All right. Well, contact me if you want to get in touch with my buddy Charles here. As you can tell, he's a wealth of information, and this water stuff is absolutely fascinating. The Bob Tuskin Show at gmail.com is my email. Of course, you can find me on all of the social media platforms, Bob Tuskin. Charles, we're going to have to do this again. Any final thoughts before we let you go? It's been a fascinating look at a number of different things, but I'm curious to hear any final thoughts you might have, and what maybe we can cover next time.
There's a real big contamination problem for people, and that's their swimming pool. So because I do live here in Florida, there are so many pool homes, and most people are swimming in a toxic soup, which is also really, really harmful. Your swimming pool might look crystal clear and beautiful, but it's hiding hidden toxic chemicals, chloramines, trihalomethanes, disinfection byproducts, and chlorine itself. And we developed a way to make your swimming pool chemical free as well. So all of these things are things we can talk about anytime you'd like.
Awesome. We'll do it again, Charles. It's been fascinating. Thanks for coming on the Bob Tuskin Show.
Thank you. You have a blessed day.
Take care, buddy.